There was nothing unusual about the view or the route she was taking. Everything looked identical for the past 5 or more years. The streets as grim as she remembered, with rubbish on the ground and unsavory individuals lurking in the shadows of the countless corners and narrow alleys. Alice passed the half-deconstructed building and numerous unfinished houses from during and after the Revolution. Her least favorite stretch of her journey home was just about to come as she quickly walked towards the entrance to the forgotten park. The trees have overgrown, grass reclaimed the wide trails, and more suspicious beings moved in, and the city stopped caring for it. There, she realized how much of a different mood she was in. She was happy. It was the last time. Her life flattened soon after reaching adulthood. She found the right person to settle with, got a job that paid enough to stay afloat, and even occasionally allowed for something extra. That was all she wanted then, and with her wife by her side, it even made sense for a period of time. Too late did she realize how much was the mundane chase after her monthly wage smothering her. She had grown to hate the job, but couldn't escape the convenience of the regularity. Alice stayed because despite the depressing walk, Laura was waiting there every time she got home, smiling. Even though it must have been forced at times, especially towards the end, it made the days bearable enough. But then she was taken away. Her unofficial wife couldn't keep fighting forever, and the illness nobody bothered to cure anymore claimed her life. Her smile soured and became a reminder of years lived for someone else. Losing the single reason for her happiness threw Alice into a spiral of angry depression. The already dark days turned darker still. She barely saw where to lay her feet as she struggled to push further, each day in the supermarket, dealing with people and their trivial issues. The journeys became more treacherous, and the evenings at home infinitely lonelier. The frustration, helplessness, the constant reminder that everybody moved on because nobody could know. But she never forgot. She shook her head to remove herself from the past and focused on what was happening right then. All the struggles she had been through, everything in the last 2 years culminating in emotions she could no longer hold inside. She finally said everything she wanted and quit her job. She had already given up her apartment. She's leaving the city. Going north was always tempting, even a dream, but she lacked the courage. Now she has nothing to lose, and for the first time since Laura had gone, she felt happy and excited about what was coming. By this time, she reached the last part of her journey and saw her building in the distance, a grey slab of concrete amongst all the others. In through the multi-story car park, almost there. Everything has been packed and arranged. She really is going to leave. Her feet slapped against the worn lino of the stairs as the vision of the future gave her another energy boost. Alice reached for the door from the final step, but her body crashed into it as it refused to move. She gave it another push, but the door would not budge. With an annoyed exhale, she turned to head back through the building and walk around, but 2 men were blocking her way. The light grey cloth covering their faces couldn't mean good news. After carefully trying to open the door again, she stopped moving, waiting for the men to act. They seemed hesitant. Surprisingly, the taller of the two appeared unsure whether he wanted to be there. She gave it a short consideration, then bolted towards the menacing man, startling him and his accomplice by her determination. Both men instinctively shifted back, creating a gap through which she slipped on the staircase. The sound of her rushing step was soon overrun by the heavy footing of her perpetrators. The door at the bottom of the hall burst open as she almost ran into a car standing in front of them. Alice briefly met eyes with the surprised driver and was about to ask for help, but realized there was no good reason for him to park where he did. He had to be involved. She looked around to see if there was anyone else, but the area was mostly deserted. Gaining speed again, she continued towards the nearby exit with the man closely behind her. The long stretch from the door offered no cover or opportunity to change direction suddenly, and her pursuers caught up. They tackled her to the ground and quickly stifled her screams with a bundled cloth. Then they put a dark bag over her head and lifted her up, pushing her towards the car. They were not mean or violent. They set her up, tied her hands and ankles on the car's back seat, and to her surprise, gently closed the door. She gave up trying to make noise or kick the nearest man and stayed quiet, listening to them. One man sat next to her while the other two occupied the front seats, and then they started moving. Alice closed her eyes, trying to think about the situation without panicking, but she couldn't come up with anything to comfort her. There was nobody to miss her, no one to look for her. She had to get out on her own. The ride was long. She had been up since early morning, and despite the adrenaline in her veins, she eventually started to drift away. Alice woke up as she was pulled out of the car and instinctively kicked around. One of her shoes landed in something soft, and she heard an abrupt exhale followed by a stifled swear. Encouraged by her success, she started moving her entire body with nails scratching her skin as the men were losing grip. Then, as if they decided as one, they released their fingers and she fell hard on the cold ground. The impact pushed air out of her lungs and startled her. Alice froze, and in the following silence, heard the echo of her fall. Her captors remained quiet while she contemplated her next move, but decided against any more resistance. Perhaps taking advantage of their relatively gentle manners later on was an option. After a short while, they helped her back up, and she did what she could to keep up despite the rope restricting her legs. They finally removed the bag from her head, and the saliva-soaked cloth fell out of her mouth. She stretched her jaw as she looked around. Her limbs were tied still, although to the table this time. She was in a brightly lit room. There was one man in a white cloak and the three men who abducted her, all standing on the opposite side of the room, quietly talking, occasionally looking in her direction. "You sure you want to go through?" she overheard. "We must give it up," another voice replied. Alice couldn't hear anything else as they noticed her interest and lowered the volume further. Before long, they came to her and spread around the table. All of them seemed anxious and unconvinced. Their looks jumped from each other to her body, but never matched her searching eyes. She grabbed the opportunity to talk. "Please," Alice pleaded. "I don't know what you want from me, but I will do whatever you ask me. Just please don't hurt me. I won't fight anymore." Her voice faded, and she continued her search for any of their eyes. But they continued to avoid her, driving her desperation even further. She knew they didn't want to do whatever was meant to happen next, and her responsibility was to sway them in her favor. But they knew that, and their resistance to her attempts drove her mad. Cowards! "I have barely any money," Alice's voice changed. She suddenly was overcome by anger. "You won't get anything from me. You can't hold me ransom. There is nobody to respond to you." She inhaled to continue, but the man closest to her had spoke first. "That's the point. We don't want anybody to look for you." He looked her straight in the eyes as silence reclaimed the space around the stunned woman. His face was red and eyes determined, although she heard his voice shake towards the end of his statement. He appeared so young and tired. More importantly, however, she feared his newly found resoluteness. She knew he reached his decision. Whatever bridge stood between him and the next step has been crossed and burning behind his back. Without further hesitation, he leaned over her head and stabbed her arm with a sharp object. Soon after, he removed it from the wound and replaced it with a bag which he tightened around Alice's shaking arm. Suddenly, pain worse than any previously experienced spread from her arm to her entire body. She screamed so long until she could no longer make any sound. everything dove into darkness.